All right, welcome everyone to Monterey Podcast. I'm your host, Dominic, and I'm super excited today. I have Jonathan Halloran with us, who is the owner and president of Earth Power, and it's something that is not as commonly known throughout the construction industry that I think is going to make for a very interesting conversation today. So I'm going to let Jonathan introduce himself and give a little bit of a brief background into his company and how he started it up and what he does. So welcome, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. It's great to be with you. And thanks for the opportunity to talk a little bit about this. And as you mentioned, ground source heat pumps or geothermal is a bit of a niche market right now. We have about 1% market share across the US, more in Europe. And I got into this business personally because I was frustrated. I wanted to put it in my house and I was frustrated there was nobody who would do it in the Chicago area. It's, it's kind of a very specialized market. I'm a civil engineer by training. I've spent the last 35 years in and around the construction industry. I've made 6 job changes in that time, and they've been in 6 different industries. So I worked in heavy construction, I worked in design, I worked in technology, construction insurance, all these things with construction. And then I started a home building company in West Africa 12 years ago, and that's still running. And now I started Earth Power 3 years ago. Essentially, I could have geothermal in my house. And as you mentioned, it's kind of a niche product, and it's a fairly straightforward technology. It's been around for 100 years, where you're using the ground to heat and cool a home, to drive a heat pump, as opposed to the more common thing you'd see with an air conditioner, where there's a condenser sitting outside and doing that.
So I think it would be beneficial to kind of go into how do you do that? How do you use the ground and the earth to heat or cool your home? I think it would be interesting for everyone to understand how that works.
Sure. So it's as I mentioned, this is not a new technology. It's been around for a long time, and it's much more widely adopted in Europe for a bunch of reasons. So it's actually, I'm a civil engineer by training. This really falls in the mechanical engineering world. So it was a bit of a learning curve for me in the beginning to kind of understand the technology. It's been really interesting. I told my wife the other day, I'm looking forward to not learning new things. So the first 3 years have been learning a lot of new things, but at the same time now I'm kind of getting more of the repetition. It's funny sometimes to be functioning as an HVAC technician at times and going to someone's house and I'm thinking, I've got an MBA and, and done all these things, and to them I'm an HVAC technician who shows up. But the technology is fairly straightforward. What you're doing is the ground is essentially a heat exchanger. And the most common way to do this, and the way that we do it, is you drill holes in the ground. In our case, it's more shallow vertical holes. So we're going 50 to 150 feet down. Other technologies will go as deep as 800 or 1,000 feet. And you put a heat exchanger, which is just a plastic pipe with a U at the bottom, so that fluid can flow down and then flow back up. And that fluid is then going, and I say fluid because it's mostly water, but there's some antifreeze in there too. It's going into a heat exchanger, which is inside of a heat pump. And a heat pump, is, everyone knows, is an air conditioner. So an air conditioner is a heat pump. It's a heat pump that only runs in cooling. Most heat pumps today will have a reversing valve so they can switch from heating to cooling. And what that heat in the ground is doing is you're pulling heat out of the ground in the heating season, and you're giving it to the refrigerant, which then runs through a compressor and heats up a refrigerant, which then goes through a coil, just like you'd see an AC coil sitting above your furnace. And that's giving off heat instead of taking heat out of the air as it would in air conditioning season. And the magic of geothermal is that the ground in the northern US is between 50 and 55 degrees constantly throughout the year. So instead of trying to draw heat out of the air when it's like 10 degrees outside, as an air source heat pump would, we're kind of drawing it from that more steady conditions. And in the soil that we work in the Chicago area, which is saturated year round, it does a really nice job of pulling that heat out of the ground kind of throughout the year. And then you reverse it in the summer, you're putting heat back into the ground, and you're taking it out of the air in the house and putting it back into the ground. It just makes for a very efficient process. It's about 400 to 500% efficient, which sounds kind of funky, but you're comparing it to electric resistance heat, which is definitionally 100% efficient. So about twice as efficient as a traditional air conditioner or air source heat pump.
Understandable. So, I mean, it sounds great. Why don't we see more of it?
Well, the fairly straightforward reason is it's not super cheap to do. There's some upfront cost to it because You're putting drilling holes somewhere, and for me, when I'm doing a single family, it's often in a backyard, sometimes in a basement. And that drilling process has some cost to it. The equipment is a little more expensive than traditional equipment. And actually, one of the things that I've realized is too, because we're an engineering team and we're not, kind of technicians who grew up in the trades, we take a very engineering approach to everything, including the ductwork and the radiant systems and all those kind of things. And so um, I realized that we're doing a lot more than the average installer does in the way that we look at the project and the way that we kind of engineer and design it. And that has a little bit of extra cost to it. But upfront cost has been the biggest barrier, mostly tied to the drilling.
Okay. So, what would be the benefits then versus a traditional system? If, obviously the costs are higher up front, does that level out over time? Is it better for the environment? Why don't we talk about that?
Yeah, so you're hitting on a couple of the key aspects. I mentioned the 400 to 500% efficiency. So that means that for every kilowatt hour you're taking out of the electric grid for your heating, you're getting 5 more of those out of the ground. So you're only going to use 1/5 as much power as you'd use with a baseboard heater to heat a house. So obviously the operational cost of that is a lot lower. The other cost that's a lot lower too is the maintenance and replacement costs, because these heat pumps, since they're all inside and the heat exchanger is in the ground, the heat exchanger, the ground loop will tend to last between 50 and 100 years, because it's undisturbed. There's no moving parts. There's nothing to break down there. It just sits in the ground. I asked someone who installs hundreds of these every year. I said, when do you have a failure in these? And he said, it's always the same thing, a shovel. Somebody went down and stuck a shovel in it and broke it. So it's a really robust technology. So when you make that investment in the ground loop, it's there essentially forever. So the replacement cost is a lot lower because you will replace the heat pump down the road. Geothermal heat pumps last a lot longer than air source heat pumps, or air conditioners, about twice as long. So you'll have half the cost in terms of replacement, about half the cost in terms of operating costs. So your long-term costs and benefits are really good. If you're the homeowner before you install the geothermal system in your house, then you're very happy because you didn't pay the upfront cost and you get the benefits for the long term.
Very
And then,
nice.
as you mentioned as well, environmentally, it's kind of off the charts in terms of efficiency. I know a consultant who says the cheapest kilowatt is the one you never use. And so you've removed combustion completely from the house. To a large extent, often the furnace is the last thing that people do when they're electrifying. And when you take that out, your indoor air quality is going to jump dramatically. Carbon monoxide leakage, carbon dioxide that aren't kind of leaking into your house. A lot of people just do it for the indoor air benefits. And then environmentally, it's the equivalent of putting a whole lot of solar panels on your house, because you're just using so much less electricity in heating and cooling. I work with a mechanical engineer who has an air source heat pump in his house. Recently, it was 7 below, and at 6 in the morning, he texted me and he said, "How many watts are you pulling?" And I said, 2,200. And I said, "How many are you pulling?" And he said, 14,000. So there's a huge difference
Yeah.
in terms of the amount of power you're using. And obviously that has some huge environmental benefits to it.
Yeah. That's quite a difference. That's almost 7 times more.
Right. Yeah. And it's not that every day. It's just that,
Right.
in those extreme conditions, we totally outshine. And my house, I have a bigger unit in my house. He has a very tight insulated house. I live in a 120-year-old house. It's a little leaky. So, my load is a little bigger than his too. But when he needs those resistance heaters to keep comfort, I don't.
So I guess I'm curious, how did you decide this is what you wanted to get into? Was it just because you really just wanted one for your home and you couldn't find anyone? Like, is that the honest to God truth?
Well, yeah. I mean, mostly, yes. I had been working, as I mentioned, in this home building company in West Africa, which is still doing great. And I'm still, I guess, chair of the board and CFO of that company, although I don't have a lot to do with it. And had been doing that for 10 years. It was, a labor of love. It's kind of thriving now we have several team members there running things. And so, after 10 years of doing it, I was ready to do something new. And so I was kind of looking for something new. I really worked a lot of corporate in my career and was very happy to not be doing corporate anymore. It's an entrepreneurial journey, which I've enjoyed. And I, had thought about this. I had a 12-year-old gas furnace and was realizing it was going to be time to replace that soon, and loved the idea of getting gas out of the house. I wish I'd done it when my kids were younger, because the benefits of not having, that carbon monoxide and methane in your house is a pretty big deal, as I've learned after the fact. But it's something that I was interested in. My family was supportive, and so I went out looking for people to install it and realized that in the city of Chicago in particular, people are afraid of small lots, which make it difficult. Permitting process that's fairly complicated. But once you know it, you kind of know it, both the city and the county. And there's a lot of things you need to do, a bunch of licensing requirements and things like that. So a lot of people who do this kind of technology, and they might install gas furnaces and air source heat pumps too, because they're HVAC people, just didn't want to deal with the hassle of working in the city. So I realized after talking to a few people and not talking to a lot of people who won't even return your calls, that there was a need. And I thought, I can't be the only person who's interested in this. And it turns out I'm not. There are a lot of people who would like to have this technology. And now we're really starting to figure out that on the commercial side, it's really a completely untapped market. Apartment buildings, strip malls, things like that. They're perfect candidates for this kind of technology, and where there's huge tax credits and rebates available that make it actually cheaper than putting in conventional equipment. So that's a new market that we're just starting to get into. Same thing, urban environment. A lot of people don't want to touch it, but that's where we live and, enjoy working. A lot of our team lives in the city, so they're happy to take jobs in the city.
Nice. So how do you find people that want it? You said now that you've kind of been out and talking to people, you're realizing how many people actually are interested in this. How do you get out in front of them?
So there's a lot of things. We members of the Illinois Green Alliance, and we are kind of hyper local to Chicago and the suburbs. Don't have big plans to go. We're probably going to do a job in northern Indiana soon, but our focus is this area for a bunch of reasons. Spend my life on airplanes in past lives and don't have an interest in doing that again. So there's a fairly small community of architects, engineers, developers who are interested in this kind of technology. As you mentioned, a lot of them don't even understand it or know about it yet or understand the benefits. Particularly the developer community does not understand that you're actually losing money if you're installing conventional heating and cooling equipment in a new build, mostly. Um, and just kind of getting out in front of that is a bit of a slow process. There's a lot of word of mouth. There's communities like Oak Park that have rules where you can't put in a new gas meter. So if you are doing new construction, you can't put natural gas in. So, you really don't have a lot of choices. And a lot of people are realizing that geothermal is a really much more efficient and cost effective way to go in those scenarios. So it's a lot of traditional word of mouth and knowing kind of getting to know architects, going to community meetings and things like that. And it's kind of interesting once you get started. There's so few qualified installers out there that your name gets passed around very quickly.
There you go. Awesome. So you mentioned a little bit about some of the challenges in relations to permitting or licensing. I would assume that's due to the fact that we're drilling into the earth and basically proximity to anything else, making sure we're not, going through any utilities, making sure we're out of easements, things like that. Is that kind of the challenges that you are having?
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. Part of it is just generally it's a disjointed world, and sometimes the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand. But yeah, as you mentioned, when you are drilling underground, there are more regulations on top of kind of standard building code and things like that, which apply. My the signature line on my email is almost a joke now because I have all of these licenses and registrations listed there. Partly because every time I have to look up the number, I'm like, I don't where the heck did I put that? But I've got and I am a professional engineer, which is very rare in this world too. So I can actually stamp plans when needed and things like that, which is helpful sometimes for architects who don't really understand the technology and can't go to a traditional mechanical engineer and say, hey, can you design this system? Because most of them barely understand the concept. But yes, there's well driller license, there's ICC registrations, there's all kinds of things to do. Every municipality wants you to register there as a contractor in their town. It is a bit, I suppose, if you were in a place where there was a few less municipal divisions than the Chicago suburbs, it maybe would be less of a big deal. But it can be intimidating, and it's why a lot of people in this industry kind of stay home. They don't like to move around a lot. If you're a carpenter, you can kind of go anywhere and there's really no registration, and you just, unless you're a union carpenter, there's not a lot to calling yourself a carpenter. And I'm not knocking on carpenters. My sister was a union carpenter for 30 years, and I have a lot of respect for people who can drive a 16 penny nail with two strokes, which I cannot do. But it's not something where you're going to have to do a bunch of technical training. But we're regulated by the EPA, we're regulated by the state of Illinois, we're regulated by Cook County, we're regulated by the city of Chicago, and all kinds of layers in each one of those. So it is a little intimidating, and maybe I shouldn't have been surprised that nobody would come to my house and drill holes in my backyard, because
Had to
it
be
takes some time.
resilient to get through all that, right?
You do, and you kind of have to. And then, some of the recent tax changes have really upended the industry. So the July 4th bill of last year changed the way that the tax credits work a lot, very dramatically. And, there's the old saying that businesses don't care if there's a Democrat or a Republican in power, they just want consistency. Well, we didn't get consistency. We got a lot of inconsistency and a lot of kind of new regulations. I shouldn't say regulations, it's all around the tax code. But we're all kind of bouncing back from that and figuring out what's next. And I think what's next is really good in Northern Illinois. It's just going to take a little while to get there.
Well, that's good to hear. So, I guess, what is next? What are we looking towards in the next 6 to 12 months? I guess, how big's your team now? Are you looking to grow? Stay where you're at?
Yeah.
Talk to me.
So, it was the end of, so what happened was on the July 4th federal tax bill, they eliminated the residential tax credit for geothermal, which had been around for a couple decades and had been part of that equalization of the cost that we talked about in the industry. So how do you pay for the ground loop and the heat pump installation? Well, the federal tax credit actually took care of that. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's good for the federal government and good for the state and good for the utilities, because it really, one of the benefits I didn't mention is that's really important is lowering the peak load. So utilities talk about this all the time. Utilities are designed for like the 5 worst hours of the year. And so you have to create, I don't know how many hours there are in a year, but there are a lot, but they have to design the system to deal with the 5 worst hours of the year so you don't black out. Well, geothermal does an incredible job of bringing that peak down. And so if everyone with an air conditioner in their house switched to geothermal, the utilities would have billions and billions and billions of dollars not to spend on grid upgrades because you cut off that peak. And anyway, so, what do I see kind of going forward in Illinois? We did pass a new law back in October, signed in January, which is going to increase the renewable energy credits. So this is something that's been around for solar for a long time. And geothermal is now going to benefit throughout the state from renewable energy credits in a much bigger way than it has in the past. It's an opaque process, and exactly how long that's going to take to roll out is a little bit unclear, but it's going to be very helpful for both residential and commercial customers who want to implement in the near future. And the other thing that changed in the July 4th bill of last year, federal bill, was leasing is now allowed. So you can now lease use a commercial lease to lease a residential system the way people do with solar. So that had always been banned by the IRS, and they changed the law so that it's not banned anymore. So that is going to help a lot of people make it much more affordable by not having an upfront payment. They can replace their HVAC system with nothing upfront and also benefit from the commercial tax credit, which did not go away on July 4th, just the residential one went. So it's very complicated. From a consumer standpoint, it's a little bit difficult to navigate. That's kind of my job, is to help people understand that. But I think in the next 6 to 12 months, we will be ramping up a lot, and we're going to be probably growing the team significantly. We've got about 6 FTEs right now, and as well as lots of subcontractors. So there's a lot of things we don't kind of do in-house, like, duct work and things like that. We have a certain amount of expertise, but it's just, flexing teams on things like that. So at any point, we might have 15 people working out in the field, but, typically 5 or 6 of them are our team.
So are you mainly focused on the design aspect of it, or do you handle the drilling and the installation as well? Or talk to me about that.
We're completely vertically integrated. So in this world, you typically have people who are designers, you have people who are drillers, and you have people who are installers, and you have people who are service technicians. And often there's not overlap in those things. So we do the whole thing. We are designers. We do use sub-consultants for parts of that, but we do a fair amount of that ourselves. We do the drilling, which is highly unusual for people to do drilling and installation. But I'm a civil engineer by background, and we wanted to get some technology that could get into an urban lot. And so we use a kind of a micro drill to go places that a 40-ton truck can't go. And then we do the installation, the flushing and filling of the system, the actual installation, procurement and installation of the heat pump. We'll do ductwork, we'll do radiant, kind of all the way to the end. And whether that's a retrofit or a new construction, we're about 50-50 between retrofit and new construction. The scope may be more or less. And then we do service too. And I get, service calls now, and sometimes not just systems I've installed, but the ones I haven't installed. And sometimes you look at it and you say, boy, I've only been doing this a couple of years, but I wouldn't have done that. So I know you can always come behind somebody else
Yep.
and critique their work. And I have no doubt that people would critique our work behind us. But it is, one of those things where the industry is not super disciplined about how careful they are with some things. And some people are, and some people are really good about some things and other things. So there's a huge amount of work in retrofits, in, kind of optimizing systems, and even in replacing heat pumps, because they do 20 years down the road, they do need to be replaced. So we're doing all of those things.
That's sounds like a lot, but
Yeah,
that's
well,
good.
that's
That
good.
means from a civil engineering background to be this familiar with everything mechanically and to be successful, I think kudos to you. That's a lot of progress that you've made over the last couple of years, in my opinion.
Well, thank you, but I will say I certainly haven't done it alone. I had some great partners, mechanical engineer who's just an incredible expert in designing single family residential systems and really forward thinking on all of that. And we have to stay out of things like the building envelope. Sometimes it's frustrating when you see an architect design something and they're like, boy, you're going to make this system a lot more expensive, and you could have done something that would cost virtually nothing to make it better. But sometimes you just need to keep your mouth shut and move on, and not, kind of overextend yourself and other things. But I've worked with a ton of experts, the industry associations, the manufacturer I do my primary work with, Enertech, is unbelievable in terms of technical support and assistance. And you get, build those relationships. And there are so many people out there who know things inside and out and are just so willing to help. So it's a great industry from that perspective of people who want to help, who really believe in what we're doing. And in some ways, I mean, I can say this too. I want more heat pumps installed, geothermal heat pumps in particular. And whether I do that or somebody else does it, it's all good. So I think, we're tend to be an industry of collaborators too. And I really appreciate being in that. The least cutthroat industry I've ever worked in my life.
Sounds like it. It sounds like everyone's just wants to get the word out about this and implement it a little bit more into everyone's lives. So, I mean, it's great to be part of a community that's working together instead of cutthroat competition.
Yeah. It's not that we're not competing, because we do.
Right.
You've got to keep your prices competitive and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to figuring out the next efficiency and technology, or a little trick to help you do your job better or make the systems run better, there's a huge amount of collaboration, and I really like.
Awesome to hear. So I guess if you had a magic wand right now, like let's talk about like what could you wave and say, hey, I want to fix this or I want to make this better, and that way it'll help me get to my goals in 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly around the tax and credit structure, which has been frustrating, and it's the companies that are rolling out the leasing programs, which are going to benefit. In the Chicago area, everything on the commercial side gets at least a 40% tax credit, and that's didn't change with the July 4th bill, but it's been a very slow rollout of the companies that are doing the leasing. It's, a little bit too big for me to tackle that, because that sort of that financial side and legal risk and all that kind of stuff is too
Yeah.
big. So I think I'm really looking forward to them getting that fully rolled out, in terms of the couple of leasing companies that are out there. I think it's an incredible opportunity. I think the benefits to consumers on residential and commercial are huge. And then I think the thing that we most like to see is a little more consistency from the federal government in how they approach these things. So if the federal government could be a little bit more consistent, geothermal has always been a bipartisan topic up until recently, because it's American energy, it's American, the equipment is like almost 100% American content. There's almost nothing imported in the
Nice.
units that we install. So it is really energy independence. There's a lot to love about what we're doing for everybody, fighting climate change, using American resources for American challenges in the future, American power, you could call it, I think. And so I'd love to see a little more coalescing around that this is a technology that's good for the country, period, end of story, and then kind of create some consistency around what we're going to do for the next 10 or 15 years. I do believe that over time, we're not going to need the tax credits and things like that as an industry because we're going to get more and more efficient and we're going to be able to compete just based on how good we are at what we do. We're just, growing and the technology has not been adopted as widely as it could be. And I just think we need a little bit of help to get over that hump. Those are the couple of things. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is in this industry, you do not go out and hire a drilling person or even a technician. You have to make them. And so, for us, that's been great because we've gotten people from non traditional backgrounds. They are really excited about what they're doing and why they're doing it. And sometimes the work is dirty and hard. And I know that myself because I've done, every job that we have, I've done myself from digging a ditch to drilling in cold temperatures to everything you can imagine. And I think, over time, we want to build up that pool of people who can do that. And we're offering, long term, really great jobs. And that's why it was so difficult to see the rug cut out from under us because we're really growing, American jobs. And it's hard and it's not just on our side, but on the manufacturing side too. Really good manufacturing jobs in Indiana and Mitchell, South Dakota that were really undermined by the tax law changes. So consistency there would be my biggest wish.
Understood. Is this, in your opinion, since you have made some connections, like I'm from the Pittsburgh area, do you think that there's, people over in this side of the country that are dabbling in this as well?
Oh, for sure. There's no metro market in the U.S. where it doesn't exist. I mean, people do this in Houston, where it's primary air conditioning, and the soil conditions are not great for geothermal, as I understand. I don't like in our micro area. I know the ground very well, and I know what to expect. I don't know as much about what you get in other parts of the country, except for kind of conversations I have with people. But yeah, absolutely. People in Pittsburgh are doing this. I don't know installers in Pittsburgh. I do know people who do it in New York. I know people who do it in, other parts of the country. There's Dandelion Energy is the 800-pound gorilla in the industry. They're based in, I think, Connecticut, but Massachusetts, New York, the whole East Coast, and they're doing some work in Colorado now too. So I think over time you'll see some consolidation as organizations get bigger and better at what they're doing. But yes, I don't think there's anywhere in the country where you couldn't find someone. It's just sometimes it's a little more challenging to get them to return your call.
There you go. Well, that means they're probably busy. If they're one
That
of the
has
only
been.
ones in the area, that probably means that they're just spread a little too thin, and more people need to, get a little bit of better awareness, and maybe it'll, like you said, start to grow and flourish and be more prevalent in the day to day on the commercial and the residential side of things.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think you're right on that.
Let's hope so. I mean, I'm all for, trying to keep I have 3 kids. They're, 10, 7, and 6. So they are, young, and they still got to live on this world here. The more efficient and the more clean energy that we can implement to make it a better place for them to live as they grow up, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of people don't think of geothermal as clean energy, and yet it is. It's we're producing the energy right out of, as some people describe it, that giant battery that sits in your backyard.
Yep.
So it's that earth that sits under there that's picked up the solar heat and temperature over the last, couple hundred years is happy to give that back to you. You just have to tap into it. So it is the ultimate renewable energy out there. And as I said, when you don't use a kilowatt from the grid, it has benefits for everyone. People talk about, the data centers kind of wreaking havoc on the grid. We're the other side of that. We're the balancing point to it, and we're the ones who are really helping. So I guess that would be my last wish, is that if the utilities would be a little bit more receptive to this. And every time I see utility rebates for air source heat pumps, I'm like, boy, you are shooting yourself in the foot when you do that, because you're just raising those peak loads up. And you should be putting the money in our customers who are, kind of helping you out in that.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for all the insight into everything in relation to the heat pumps and the geothermal. I mean, I learned a ton today. I hope that some of our listeners are better informed, and maybe they'll go out and search their local areas and inquire a little bit more information about it. But I really enjoyed the conversation today, and I wish you nothing but the best here in the next 6 to 12 months, where it seems like you're going to be ramping up to do more and more up in the northern Illinois area. And wish you nothing but the best. Thank you so much for being on.
Oh, well, thanks, Dominic. I really appreciate you doing this. I appreciate you kind of spreading the word on technologies in construction. It's an industry that's kind of lagged in technological innovation in a lot of ways, and I think it's kind of exciting times because I think there is a lot of technology out there, not just kind of traditional HVAC like we're doing, but also how is AI going to affect the construction industry? Obviously, it's going to have a big impact there too. And I know you're leading the charge there. So thanks for being an industry leader for the rest of us.
I appreciate that. Well, best of luck, and we'll talk to you soon, Jonathan.
Okay, thanks, Dominic.